You ever look at the people who share your last name and wonder how they could see you but not know you? I'm talking about the folks who were there when you took your first breath, the ones who were supposed to protect you, but instead they painted you the villain in a story you never wrote. Let me tell you something. Rejection isn't about you. It's about their reflection. They saw something in you they didn't understand, and instead of leaning in to learn it, they pulled back because it scared them, because it challenged the lies they built their identity on. See, sometimes your very presence reveals the cracks in their mirror. And instead of fixing the mirror, they want to shatter your image. They tell you you're too much, you're too different, you're too sensitive or too strong. But the truth is you're too real. And when real walks into the room, fake has to make a choice: stand up and grow, or sit back and throw stones. And most people ain't ready for the first option, because growing requires work. It requires humility. It requires truth. And truth has a weight to it. It's heavy. Not everyone is built to carry it. And so they make you the problem because your light is too bright for the shadows they still live in. And that's not your fault. That's not your burden to carry. That's a reflection of their own fear, dressed up in judgment, hiding in tradition, wearing the mask of concern. But underneath it all, it's not you that's broken. It's their view that can't handle your clarity. They see you walking in purpose, and suddenly their comfort starts to feel like a cage. They notice you speaking with conviction, and their silence starts to feel like shame. They witness your healing, and it makes their wounds impossible. Ignore. See, rejection ain't always hate. Sometimes it's jealousy in disguise. Sometimes it's love that never learned how to express itself properly. But most times it's a mirror someone wasn't ready to look into. Because when you reflect strength, when you reflect freedom, when you reflect identity that's been wrestled with and earned and bled for, people who skip that journey feel exposed. And when people feel exposed, they either rise or they run. And most times they run right back to comfort, right back to gossip, right back to blaming you for being what they were too afraid to become. And they'll try to convince you that you're the one who changed. And maybe you did, but growth isn't betrayal. Growth is necessary. And your growth became a reminder that they stayed still, that they settled, that they never questioned the script. And now you're walking around like you wrote your own. And that's terrifying to someone who never picked up a pen. So they reject what they don't recognize and call it rebellion. They distance themselves from what challenges them and label it disrespect. They push away what doesn't conform and call it ungrateful. But you know what's really happening? You're showing them what freedom looks like. And that kind of freedom can't be explained. It has to be felt. It has to be chosen. And choosing it means letting go of old stories, of inherited pain, of toxic loyalty that never served anyone but those at the top of the dysfunction. And so here you come with your truth, your boundaries, your healing, and they don't know what to do with that because you ain't playing your part anymore. You're not shrinking to fit into their box anymore. And now the box feels too small. Now the room feels too tight. Now your presence feels like pressure because you no longer carry their expectations like chains. And that's where the rejection starts. Not because you are wrong, but because you dared to become more than what they settle for. And that's not rejection. That's revelation. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. You can be born in the same house, eat from the same table, pray in the same room, and still feel like a stranger, still feel unseen, still feel like you're speaking a language no one else wants to understand, because biology gives you connection, but it doesn't give you commitment. It doesn't guarantee love or loyalty or support. And too many people confuse proximity with purpose. They think because they were there, they know you, but being there and being present are two different things. Being related and being loyal are two different languages. And some people will quote bloodlines while breaking every bond that matters. They'll tell you family comes first while they place your pain last. They'll use tradition, like a shield to avoid transformation. They'll demand your silence to protect their comfort and call it unity. But the truth is, loyalty doesn't always wear the same last name. Sometimes it wears scars. Sometimes it shows up in a friend who didn't know you back then, but loves you right now better than anyone who did. And when you realize that, when you finally see it for what it is, you stop begging people to be something they've already chosen not to be. Loyalty means showing up when it's hard, standing firm, when the room gets quiet, defending someone, not just when they're winning, but when they're wounded. It means loving someone enough to tell the truth and staying even after the truth is spoken. And not everyone's built like that. Not everyone's wired for that kind of love. Some folks were taught that silence is safety, that keeping things hidden is loyalty, but silence that protects pain is just another kind of betrayal. And some people will wear the title of family like armor, while never learning how to actually show up with love. They'll check on you just enough to say they did just enough to keep appearances, but when it's time to stand in the fire with you, they disappear. And that's when you learn the real meaning of loyalty, because the people who love you, right, don't need a family tree to prove their place in your life. They prove it by showing up, by staying consistent, by loving you. When you're hard to love, by telling you the truth and holding you through the healing. And sometimes that truth is this: your real family may not have raised you. They may have found you when you were already broken and still chose to stay. And that kind of love, that kind of loyalty, it changes you. It teaches you that being loved correctly is not something you earn by shrinking or sacrificing or staying silent. It's something you receive when you finally decide worth more than just being tolerated, worth more than conditional love, worth more than tradition that tells you to stay small and smile through betrayal. And when you start loving yourself enough to stop calling pain family, everything shifts you. Stop chasing people who only show up when it benefits them. You stop defending people who never defended you. You stop bleeding for people who wouldn't give a drop for you. And it hurts. Yes, it does. It breaks something open inside, but in that breaking is your becoming, because loyalty is a mirror. It shows you who's really with you and who was just walking beside you until the road got rough. And when the storm comes, the ones who are real, they don't flinch. They don't flee. They dig in deeper. They love louder. They hold tighter. And when you find them, when you feel that kind of real, you'll know family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. Sometimes you're too real for the people who raised you. There's a moment when you realize you don't fit the mold. They shape for you a moment when you outgrow the small version of you. They needed to stay comfortable. And when that happens, something shifts. They stop recognizing you because the version of you they understood was the one that stayed silent, the one that made peace just to keep the room calm, the one that swallowed truth to avoid disrupting tradition. And now you speak, now you walk in rooms with your head high, and they don't know how to handle that, because the truth is not everyone who raised you was rooting for the version of you that would one day stand tall and say enough, because that version threatens the script. They never question, threatens the rules they passed down, without asking if those rules were ever right in the first place. And so when you start healing, when you start unlearning, when you stop performing, you stop playing small, you stop apologizing for growing, suddenly your presence becomes a problem. Your strength becomes defiance. Your voice becomes too loud, not because you're wrong, but because your truth exposes the silence they learned to live inside. Sometimes being real means being rejected, not because you did anything wrong, but because they were never ready to meet the version of you that stopped pretending. They were never ready to see you. Outside of the shadow they cast, they built an idea of who you were supposed to be. And you had the audacity to walk away from it, the courage to evolve, the nerve to be honest about the things nobody wanted to talk about. And now your honesty is seen as disrespect. Your distance is called pride. Your peace is mistaken for rebellion. But in truth, you're just no longer asking for permission to be whole. You're no longer dimming your light to protect their comfort. You're not arguing to be understood, because you've realized you don't need understanding to stand in truth. And it hurts. Yes, it hurts to know that the people who raised you may never see you clearly, not because you're hidden, but because clarity costs. And not everybody's willing to pay that price. So they settle for memories while you live in transformation. They cling to the past while you walk boldly into who you're becoming, and they reject what they refuse to recognize. Sometimes you're too real for the people who raised you. There's a moment when you realize you don't fit the mold. They shape for you a moment when you outgrow the small version of you. They needed to stay comfortable. And when that happens, something shifts. They stop recognizing you because the version of you they understood was the one that stayed silent, the one that made peace just to keep the room calm, the one that swallowed truth to avoid disrupting tradition. And now you speak, now you walk in rooms with your head high, and they don't know how to handle that. Because the truth is, not everyone who raised you was rooting for the version of you that would one day stand tall and say enough, because that version threatens the script. They never question threatens the rules they passed down without asking if those rules were ever right in the first place. And so when you start healing, when you start unlearning, when you stop performing, you stop playing small, you stop apologizing for growing, suddenly your presence becomes a problem. Your strength becomes defiance. Your voice becomes too loud, not because you're wrong, but because your truth exposes the silence they learn to live inside. Sometimes being real means being rejected, not because you did anything wrong, but because they were never ready to meet the version of you that stopped pretending. They were never ready to see you outside of the shadow they cast. They built an idea of who you were supposed to be, and you had the audacity to walk away from it, the courage to evolve, the nerve to be honest about the things nobody wanted to talk about. And now your honesty is seen as disrespect. Your distance is called pride. Your peace is mistaken for rebellion. But in truth, you're just no longer asking for permission to be whole. You're no longer dimming your light to protect their comfort. You're not arguing to be understood, because you realized you don't need understanding to stand in truth. And it hurts. Yes, it hurts to know that the people who raised you may never see you clearly, not because you're hidden, but because clarity costs. And not everybody's willing to pay that price. So they settle for memories while you live in transformation. They cling to the past while you walk boldly into who you're becoming, and they reject what they refuse to recognize. But listen, being too real for them doesn't mean you're wrong. It means your truth cracked the foundation of their illusion, and instead of rebuilding with you, they chose to protect the lie they were used to. Because sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it's different, and different scares. People who've built their identity on tradition, on routine, on silence. But you weren't made to repeat cycles. You were made to break them. You weren't born to fit in. You were called to disrupt. And that kind of calling comes with cost. It comes with being misunderstood, misnamed, misquoted, and yes, sometimes even mistreated by the very people who should have loved you the loudest. But your job is not to make them comfortable. Your job is to stay real. Your job is to stand in your light, even if it casts shadows on the illusions they still hold on to, because your authenticity is not rebellion. Your peace is not arrogance. Your growth is not betrayal. It's survival. It's purpose. It's divine. And no matter who walks away, you keep walking in truth, because the ones meant for you will never fear the real you. They'll celebrate it. They'll recognize it. They'll meet you where you are and not where they want you to stay. Pain can be your prison or your power. You choose. Pain will visit everyone, but how long it stays depends on whether you feed it or free it. See, pain doesn't just show up to hurt you. It shows up to teach you something, to break something open inside you so you can rebuild stronger. But most people never get past the first blow. They sit in it. They build a home inside it. They decorate their walls with old stories and convince themselves that this is all life has to offer. But pain isn't a place to live. It's a path to walk through. It's a fire you survive, not a furnace you stay in. And if you don't learn to name your pain, it will name you. It'll turn you bitter. It'll turn you small. It'll tell you you're not worth more. And you'll believe it. And you'll wear that belief like armor, thinking it protects you, when really it just isolates you. And that isolation becomes your prison. it becomes the thing that keeps you from healing, keeps you from trusting, keeps you from growing. And all the while, the key to that prison sits in your hand. And the name on the key says choice. You can choose to stay stuck or you can choose to rise. And I'm not talking about pretending everything's okay. I'm not talking about smiling through the ache. I'm talking about facing it. I'm talking about grabbing that pain by the throat and saying, you won't own me. You won't define me. You won't raise my children through me. You won't sleep next to me like a secret. I'm talking about using it as fuel, turning that breakdown into a blueprint, into a breakthrough, into something so powerful, it shakes the ground when you walk. Because here's the truth. Pain will shape you no matter what, but you get to decide what it shapes you into. You get to choose whether it makes you softer or harder, quieter or louder, smaller or stronger. You get to decide if it becomes your excuse or your elevation. And when you stop letting it whisper lies in the middle of the night, when you stop dressing it up as personality or pride or independence, and finally call it what it is, woundedness, fear, heartbreak, and then start to heal it. You don't just free yourself, you free every version of you that ever thought the pain was permanent. And when you realize that, when you stop fearing the pain and start facing it, you step into something different. You start walking like you know who you are, like you survived something that should have destroyed you and still showed up, still breathed, still loved, still spoke your name with dignity and power. And every time someone says, how did you do it? You'll say, I chose to use it. I chose to turn what tried to bury me into the very soil I grew from. And that choice, that one decision changes everything. Because now the pain doesn't own you. The past doesn't define you. The family that failed you doesn't hold you hostage. And the people who doubted you don't get to write your story anymore. You hold the pen. And that pain that once kept you quiet now gives you a voice that can break chains and open doors for others walking through their own hell. And that's how power is born, not in perfection, not in ease, not in comfort, but in the decision to rise anyway, in the choice to say, I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I chose to become after it. You owe your ancestors your healing, not your silence. There are things you carry that don't belong to you, wounds passed down like family, heirlooms, pain woven into your name, stories whispered behind closed doors like shame was part of your inheritance, and for too long you were told to stay quiet, to not speak on it, to respect the ones who came before you by protecting their secrets. But that's not respect, that's repression, and repression is how generational pain survives. It's how trauma becomes tradition. It's how cycles become culture. And one day you look in the mirror and see the weight in your eyes, the same weight you saw in theirs, and realize silence didn't save them, it swallowed them. And if you don't speak, if you don't break, if you don't choose something different, it will swallow you too. You weren't born to carry what they couldn't say you were born, to confront it, to name it, to heal it, not because they were weak, but because they didn't have what you have. Now, the knowledge, the language, the space, the awareness, the strength, and to deny your healing is to dishonor the very blood that prayed for better and bled for survival. So you rise and you speak. You break what they couldn't because you love them, not less, but more. You love them enough to stop pretending the pain didn't happen, enough to pull the curtain back on the quiet suffering, enough to say the truth out loud, even if your voice shakes, because the shaking is how the chains fall off. The shaking is the body remembering what it means to be free. And when you heal, you don't just heal for yourself, you heal for the child they buried inside themselves. You heal for the love they didn't know how to give. You heal for the woman who cried behind doors, the man who never said I love you, the sibling who disappeared into silence. You heal for the generation that didn't know healing was possible, and you become a living testimony that it is, and you stop silencing yourself to protect people who never protected you from the very thing that broke them. And you stop calling that silence love, because real love doesn't keep you in bondage. Real love liberates. Real love breaks the curse and builds something new. And that's what you were born to do. Not just survive, but transform, to turn silence into story and story into strength.